Recording is on.
Hey everyone, welcome to the BTV CopWatch training. We're happy that you're listening to this. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what this training will entail, and then we'll get started. So we'll talk a little bit about the uniqueness of doing a virtual training and also some suggestions if you happen to be using this video to hold a training with a group and what you might want to do for intros. We'll go over the history of CopWatch, both nationally and locally in Burlington, Vermont. We'll go over the reasons why we CopWatch, go over some of the legal rights. We'll touch on safety and security. We'll go over tips on how to film and interact with the various parties involved when you're filming a police interaction. We'll talk a little bit about what we do with the footage. We'll touch on some of our own experiences cop watching in Burlington. And then we'll give you an idea of how to get involved with CopWatch, with BTV CopWatch in the future, and how to get in contact with us if you'd like more information.
So welcome. Yes, training security is something we want to address in this recording. I think it's important to acknowledge that security for remote trainings and trainings in general can be difficult to maintain. And we want to make a disclaimer that we can't guarantee confidentiality whenever we gather a group of folks. With that said, whenever we host a meeting or a training, we want to ask that there are no recordings, no law enforcement, no media presence, and that folks share only first names or nicknames with what they're, according to what they're comfortable with. So at this point in a group, we'd ask folks to go around to introduce themselves by names and pronouns, and ask what brings them to CopWatch and how they got connected to the training or the meeting. I think that is an important piece to include, as it helps us know who's in the room and how they're connected with each other, and helps establish group awareness and group security by knowing that we are connected to each other. And then also we ask if there's other important group affiliations or training that people have, so we can get an idea of the experience and the perspectives that folks are bringing to the room.
So there's a number of CopWatch groups around the country. This is just a quick list that is by no means exhaustive, but it should just give you a little bit of a history. So one of the earliest sort of proto CopWatch groups in the country was the Black Panther Party, actually. And they did actually armed patrols of their neighborhoods in Oakland. And so their tactics were a little bit different than ours, obviously. In the modern era, there's a number of groups. They really sort of all go back to Berkeley CopWatch in the early 90s, which sort of started CopWatching in its modern form with cameras and that sort of thing. There's a group in Texas called the Peaceful Streets Project. BTV CopWatch actually sort of grew out of the Peaceful Streets Project. The Canfield Watchmen is a group in Ferguson, Missouri that was started after the death of Michael Brown. And finally, BTV CopWatch, that's us here in Burlington, was started in 2019. And like I said, there's many, many, many more groups like us all throughout the country.
So this is a really non-comprehensive list, but a list of some events in which community members spontaneously pulled out their phone and filmed incidents of police violence. And in these cases, the videos went viral and in a lot of cases led to protest, and in some cases legal consequences for the cops. And really, if the videos were not recorded, there may have been no awareness around these incidents or accountability for the cops. And so, of course, these still aren't wins. People were still injured or killed, and even prison time for individual cops is not a solution, especially when police are still regularly able to get away with violence. But still, we hope that cumulatively, events like this really do present a challenge to routine police abuse of power. Because in the past, it's really mostly only been mainstream or corporate media that's had the power to frame the narrative, and they almost always present the police's version of events. But now there's really been this shift from the top to the bottom, where ordinary citizens are able to tell our own stories about our own communities. This really leads to raised consciousness about the truth of stories and sparks conversation around what to do about it. And a lot of people, ask us, well, the police have body cams on them, so why do you have to be recording too? And it's true, in the 2010s or so, body cameras were introduced to a lot of police departments throughout the country, and the Burlington Police Department do have body cams. And the cops claim this as an act of transparency, but in reality, they're the ones who control who actually can see the footage. And we've learned that it can be very difficult and sometimes very expensive to access that footage. They're also in control of who carries out the accountability if the footage is ever seen. It's also the angle of the footage is obviously literally from the cop's perspective, and it can be really useful to have it an angle from a different perspective. And they also decide when the body cameras are turned on, even despite policy that says that it should be turned on. And so it's really, the property of the police. And so this is why it's still really important for citizen cop watch groups to exist and get our own accessible footage. Before I move on to the next slide, I just want to give a content warning that we are going to go over some incidents of violence in a little bit of detail that have happened in our community. So if you don't want to hear about those violent incidents, you might just want to skip a few minutes ahead to the slide afterwards.
So like the previous list that we saw, this also is not nearly comprehensive, but mostly the most prominent documented in the media stories in Burlington since 2013. And this is exclusive to the Burlington Police Department. It doesn't cover the county sheriff or state police. But the first two incidents with Wayne Burnett and Phil Grennan, these were both individuals who were living with mental disability and were both in a state of crisis and were killed by police. Shane Langvin was a Black man who was held down in the street kind of late at night when the kind of bars were closing and just kind of repeatedly punched. That one was filmed, so that did end up getting released and going kind of somewhat viral at the time. Burlington police officers were assisting Colchester PD in responding to James Hemingway in 2015, who also appeared to be in some state of crisis. And after turning off their body cams, ended up shooting at him quite a few times and hitting him twice. So you can kind of see the pattern of police, being unable to support folks in mental disability suffering in states of crisis. There's not really much ability to de-escalate or interest in de-escalating that the Burlington Police Department has shown here. The next two were these two body cam videos came out around the same time and were kind of what sparked the creation of this organization here. Mabior Jack and Jeremy Melly, was kind of similar situations where there was a fight reported downtown at bar close. The body cam footage in both cases starts with the cop approaching each of these people and who are Black men, New Americans, and immediately confronting them and using violence without either introducing themselves or giving any type of direction. Mabi Ojak was violently tackled and knocked unconscious, and Jeremy Melly was just shoved into a wall and lost consciousness as well and was injured. His brother was also at the scene, and that he had a strong reaction to that, and they ended up violently tackling him as well. The last incident was one that occurred at the UVM Medical Center. Douglas Kilburn was basically confronted as he's getting out of his car, beaten so badly that he ended up dying from the wounds days later in what the medical examiner ruled as a homicide. There's many things that we have noticed that we have chosen not to publicize, that make us aware that there is a pattern of violence in Burlington. There was an incident where a 6-year-old girl was pepper sprayed. So another good example of the police not being able to de-escalate situations. None of the officers involved in these incidents were prosecuted. In fact, the officers involved with the last 3 incidents in this list are still out there on the streets. And despite just the progressive reputation of Burlington, it's just worth underscoring that the people of the city have no more recourse in incidents of police brutality than any other place in the United States. And in addition to like the qualitative data, the city has made a focus on collecting data on police use of force, and over the from 2012 to 2018, they found that 21% of all subjects of force were Black. Around 5% of the population in Burlington is Black. Black subjects are more likely to have a gun pointed at them than white subjects. We've definitely seen plenty of cases where escalated violence is used against Black people and other non-Black people of color in Burlington, for sure. 1 in 5 instances of force results in injury, so cops are somewhat likely to injure you if they arrest you. The rates of force per arrest has been rising since 2015. 12% of arrests resulted in use of force in 2018. Some things that we've noticed while in the past year filming is that police definitely target poor and houseless populations routinely. This is a decent amount of time and effort they spend, seems to be targeting people with nowhere else to go. Escalated levels of violence are used on people of color, as I've mentioned before, and there have been several high-profile incidents, but we see things happen all the time, and not everybody notices. And because of decisions that we make to gain consent from the people that we're filming, we rarely kind of release the video. So we're not there broadcasting everything, but we do see it happening. Sorry.
Other trends that we follow in Vermont and work in solidarity with is supporting our organizers for migrant justice here in Vermont. And part of that is knowing the trends of how migrant populations are policed. So the trends in Vermont that we're seeing, and specifically around Burlington, is that ICE target migrant rights activists. There's actually a pretty publicized arrest in 2017 in which ICE pulled visible activists who had appeared on camera to talk about migrant rights. off the street of Burlington and held them for deportation. ICE also targets and profiles people who report to county courthouses across the state. Border Patrol has collaborated with Chittenden County Sheriff Department and also the Vermont DMV to target and detain migrant folks in Vermont. And also there has been a trend of citizenship checkpoints that have been set up in Swanton, South Hero, and Lebanon, New Hampshire. And these most recently were in 2019, but they are not the first times that citizenship checkpoints have been set up in this state. And like I said, we work in solidarity with Migrant Justice and stay on call if they need us for filming any of their events or protests. Check.
So to talk a little bit about why we CopWatch and why we think it's an effective way to keep people safe and hold the cops accountable. One of the main purposes of filming the police is de-escalation. So in the moment, if cops know that someone is watching, that they have a camera on them, then they are less likely to abuse their power. And we've heard people attest to this, people who have frequent interactions with the police, who are often targeted by the police, like people experiencing homelessness. They'll tell us that they act differently when cameras are on them. And then really also long term, the more normalized it is for folks to pull out their camera and film the cops, then the police will really never know if and when someone is around who could be recording. And so the hope is that on a daily basis, they really feel disempowered to be aggressive or violent. Another purpose is documentation in case footage comes in handy, whether in a court case or potentially to the media, although again, because of consent and privacy concerns, we don't usually go that route, but potentially to raise awareness if that is appropriate. CopWatch is also about education and empowerment. So we hold trainings like these to share knowledge around knowing your rights. We educate the community about alternatives to calling the police so that we can access other resources without needing to get the police involved, who can often escalate situations. We really are trying to encourage as many folks to film as possible, both during group shifts that we hold regularly, but also just spontaneously filming when they come across an incident, so that we have as many eyes and ears on the ground as possible at all times. So again, it becomes a long-term kind of strategy of just empowering the police. BTV CopWatch has also really focused on community care and defense. So again, in the moment when we're filming, it's powerful for those of us who have had or can imagine how scary an interaction with the police is, especially if you're alone. It can be really comforting just to know that someone is there filming who has your back, which is why we try to let people know quickly that we're there to film the police so that they don't violate their rights. And often people are really thankful for us being there. And as BTV CopWatch continues to evolve, it's really become more and more about community care, even outside of filming the police. So we have done a lot of mutual aid projects lately, especially at the time of filming. COVID-19 has recently hit, and we've been doing a lot of mutual aid fundraising and just getting out to talk to folks and see what their needs are and meeting those needs, whether it's food or supplies or cash. And building those relationships with folks in the community is really key because, and it relates back because we hold the belief that strong communities make police obsolete. And so the more we can protect and serve each other, the less we need to depend on the oppressive police system. And often during group shifts, that's what it's about too. Even if it's a quiet day and there's no police incidents to film, it might be just chatting with folks who are living on the streets and hearing their stories and getting to know them and what's been going on. It could also be handling a situation where normally someone might not know what to do and might want to call the police, but if there's a group of us who can handle or de-escalate a situation on our own, then the police don't have to get there in the first place. We've also been talking about potentially starting community care projects like jail support, court support, bail funds, so stay tuned for that. And then the last one here is protest and disruption. Usually when we think of protest, we think of things like a march or a road blockade, but really protest can be anything that's a shift from business as usual, that's demonstrating alternative behavior in public that departs from the status quo and kind of shakes people out of their bubble and makes them question their usual thinking, like, why are the cops here? Might it be helpful to film? And the hope is that it kind of changes beliefs and culture, which can really lead to a shift in power. And so especially for those of us who are white or have other facets of our identity which make us less likely to be targeted by the police, it's a way to use our privilege to challenge those existing paradigms of power. So it's definitely more subversive than other forms of protest that we usually think about. But we often find while doing it that it does feel like a protest, kind of a micro protest. It's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes or scary, but it's also energizing and feels important to confront authority and injustice, even on that small scale.
So before heading out to CopWatch, it's helpful to know a little bit about what some of your legal rights are. But before going into that, I just want to point out that this is not meant to be a general purpose, know your rights sort of a slide. This kind of builds on that and talks about some of the legality of filming specifically. That being said, if you want to learn about that, good resources are to check with the ACLU, the National Lawyers Guild, or a CopWatch group in your area. And we have some materials that do talk about generally what your rights are, and we will post them down in the show notes. But the long and the short of it is that it is legal to film the police. There's a Supreme Court case called Glick versus Cuniff from 2011 that basically ruled that it's legal to film the police in a public space. As far as in private, Vermont is what's called a one-party consent state. So you may have heard of this concept. There's sort of one-party and all-party consent states. And this traditionally has to do with phone calls, but it's really about recording conversations. So what this means is in an all-party consent state, it's generally considered that you need to have consent of all parties to a conversation in order to record that conversation. In Vermont, you only need consent from one of the parties. So this means that if you're not filming in a public place, you may need to get consent from one of the people involved, but not all of them. So say there was a situation and someone invited you into their home to film a situation with the police. If they gave you consent to film, you would be within your rights to do so. And a police officer couldn't tell you to stop despite the fact that you were inside their house. That being said, recording surreptitiously or without consent in a private space, like sort of recording secretly, is probably illegal. And as you'll see further on in this training, we mostly recommend filming overtly and sort of like letting the police know that you're filming. And so that tends to not be a problem legally.
Yeah, so building on that, some considerations to have for yourself when thinking about going into cop watching is to know at what level you'd like to put yourself at risk. And this is taking into account your safety and your privilege, and also what vulnerabilities you hold. So if you are choosing to film, you are choosing to put yourself in the vicinity and in the awareness of police officers. And if you're at heightened risk for being profiled, abused, or arrested, that should be a very conscious choice that you are taking to do that action, and also very supported that you may not want to do that. And as a very strong point we want to make is there are many ways to support cop watching work, and they aren't all filming the police in public. So along with your vulnerabilities, consider if you're on probation or parole. This could be putting yourself in danger of getting in trouble with your parole officer. Also, do you suffer from PTSD or other anxiety or anxiety-related health conditions? You want to be sure that you're not putting yourself in bodily harm, in danger of bodily harm by being around police in a stressful situation. Also, for considerations to know going into police interactions, your legal rights may or may not protect you in the moment. Police lie, full stop, and they often lie about your rights, and they can misrepresent your actions in police reports and to other people. So that's why we try to film in groups so that we're more protected from that. But just know that police lie often and are very well documented as misrepresenting people in reports. And also for us in Burlington, we've had some recent, very publicized events of uncovering targeting and harassing of activists by law enforcement through social media. So that is another consideration to take, is knowing that once you become visible and police become aware of you as an individual, you may become target of harassment online and offline as well. So these are things that everyone should soberly consider for themselves, understand their vulnerabilities, and take steps back that will keep them safe, and also challenge yourself to take step forwards when you know that your identities hold privilege. So I'm talking directly to white Vermonters here, white folks here, people who hold quote unquote native status, or masculine identities, or who hold different levels of privilege that can be used to keep themselves more safe when they are filming the police, and allow folks who are more vulnerable to step back and do work that doesn't put them at risk. Check.
We want to talk for a minute about phone security. Our phones are sort of intimate spaces, and by using them to record police, we're sort of dangling them out there in a sense. We all have things on our phones that we consider private, or that we might not want to come into for the police to have access to. So, for example, you may not want the police to have access to your private text messages, to know who your contacts are. You may have private photographs or other sorts of things on there. And in the course of cop watching, we may even record certain things that we wouldn't want the police to get access to. And so both for our own safety and security, and also for the security and safety of our comrades, and for just random people who we may be filming in the streets, it's really important to make sure that we keep our phones secure. While you're out filming, it is possible that police could try to seize your phone and search it. This is not something that's happened to anyone in BTV CopWatch, but it is a distinct possibility. It could happen at some point, especially if police believe that you have filmed a so-called crime. They might be interested in seizing it. Technically, they need a warrant to search your phone, but they may be able to seize your phone and take it away from you without a warrant. And what they'll try to do is get a warrant from a judge down the road. It might take a certain amount of time, search your phone, and then you might or might not get it back. So basically what this means is you might not have any recourse to prevent the police from physically taking your phone away from you and searching it at a later time. And so it's really important that we keep our phones set up in a way that's secure, so that if something like that does occur, it will make it less likely that the police will be able to access what's on your phone. So there's a couple of really simple steps you can take to make yourself safer and more secure in this situation. The simplest and first one is to just make sure your phone is updated. So go into your phone's settings. There's probably an updates screen. Make sure that automatic updates are enabled and that you're running the latest version of your phone's operating system. And the second one is to make sure that your phone's storage is encrypted. And as far as I know, most modern phones do this automatically. And so it's not something that you need to necessarily worry very much about. But that being said, the encryption will only be as good as the password that you choose for your phone. So it's really important to choose a strong password. And so things like PIN numbers, lock patterns, which are sort of those codes where you swipe a shape, those are really not very good because, for example, with a 4 or 5 or even a 6-digit PIN, there's only a certain number of possibilities. So if you chose a 5-digit PIN, there's only 10,000 possibilities. And so it's very possible that the police could essentially plug your phone into a special device that would go and try all 10,000 PIN numbers until it found yours. So it's really important that you use a password that is long and somewhat complex. So there's lots of different sort of theories about how to choose a good password, and I won't go into it. But just choose a password instead of a PIN number, like you would on a website. The next big thing is to remove biometric authentication from your phone while you're cop watching. So this means things like Face ID, fingerprint unlock, things like that. The reason for that is if your phone is protected with a password, you have certain legal protections that may protect you in certain cases. So if your phone is taken and it's protected with a password, it may be the case that the police are not legally allowed to force you to divulge your password. However, biometrics never ever have that protection. So if your phone is taken and it's protected with a Face ID or a fingerprint, a judge might rule that you have to unlock the phone. And even if you still choose to resist, the police may still be able to unlock your phone simply by holding it up to your face or by putting your finger onto the phone. And so having a password really protects us from that and sort of restores that agency to where you can always choose not to divulge your password. And so obviously you can sort of just go into your phone settings and disable Face ID, disable fingerprint, and be done with it. And that's great. However, we sort of acknowledge that that can be inconvenient and that people want their phones to be easier to use, and we understand that. And so there's some trade-offs that you can do that can allow you to use that can allow you to use a Face ID or a fingerprint for everyday use. But when you come into a situation where you might want a cop watch, you can disable them temporarily. And these differ depending on the phone that you have. There's a feature on Android called lockdown mode. And there's a feature on iOS or iPhones that's sort of unofficially called the cop button or cop mode. And I won't go into them. I think you should just Google them. They're very, very simple to set up, and there's lots of little articles that will sort of walk you through it. So I think those are worth checking out.
So there's a few tips in here, or just kind of procedure that we use when we prepare to film. It's really ideal to have a group of cop watchers to not do it alone, which is why we do group shifts pretty regularly. And certainly at actions like protests, definitely have at least one or two other people with you. A couple benefits of this is that you can surround a situation and get various angles on it. It's also a safety precaution. So if a cop ends up getting aggressive with you, you have another witness and another recorder there with you. That being said, certainly many of us have been in situations where we spontaneously come across a police interaction and we do end up filming alone. It's really a personal decision you have to make based on your own comfort level. When we are in a group, we do film overtly because there's that benefit of the cops knowing that they're being filmed as a de-escalation tactic. But if you're alone, you may decide to film overtly if you feel comfortable. You may decide to be a little bit more discreet about it. Maybe just holding your phone, down where it's not obvious that you're recording, but you are. Or perhaps you're in your house and you see an event outside and you can film from your window. It's really your call. But when we do go out on group shifts, there's a few things we do beforehand. So we'll gather together again in a group of 3 or more is great. Sometimes we end up in a big group of 10 and we might split off into a few smaller groups. But regardless, we start a group chat in the messaging app Signal, which is a encrypted messaging platform with everyone who's participating in the group shift, and we share emergency contact information just in case, and that's just used throughout the time that we're out together to communicate if you do split off, to let people know where you're at and things like that. We do have Know Your Rights kind of trifold cards, small, that can fit in your pocket, and so everyone takes a few of those, which can come in handy when you're filming, to hand to either the people interacting with the police or passersby who are wondering what you're doing, or even for yourself, because there's a few phrases in there to remember, just to let the police know I'm not physically interfering and things like that. We discuss what our plan is, kind of the logistics. Many of our shifts are just on foot, walking around downtown, because Burlington is a pretty small area, but we have been doing more bike shifts, which has been fun. Occasionally we'll go in cars. So yeah, we'll just talk about how we're going about it. That'll be planned beforehand as well, so people can make that decision. And we also like to just discuss if there's any particularly salient climate in the area that we are cop watching in. So for example, right now at the time of this filming, the protests in Minneapolis and throughout the country are, it's pretty intense. And so there probably is more tension between cops and the community, and the cops are probably hyper vigilant right now, and probably even more than usual, treating and viewing the public as the enemy, right? So we actually do want to talk about how there's some increased risk there as cop watchers, because the cops are probably more on edge than usual. So just to discuss things like that and assess everyone's comfort level and how we're going to go about things. And then we read aloud the code of conduct to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So we'll read that now for you as well.
So these are some things that we find kind of key in maintaining a safe environment for cop watchers, a safe environment for the community members that we cop watch around, and also just kind of a way to build trust as much as we can with the community and maintain trust that we have built. So we ask that participants in BTV CopWatch must not be members of any local, state, federal law enforcement agency, commit to anti-oppression in our dealings with each other and the community, do not tolerate racism, sexism, homophobia, or other forms of oppression, respect the confidentiality of fellow cop watchers, Just because someone is showing up to CopWatch does not mean that they want that to be known. So please do not communicate that you know somebody is CopWatching unless you have consent. Respect the privacy and dignity of community members who we film. Seek consensus with other CopWatchers before communicating any information obtained while CopWatching. This includes video, audio, or any firsthand accounts of interactions with police or community members. Get consent before publishing any identifying information obtained while CopWatching. And respect community members' requests to stop filming them, especially when there's no immediate danger. Participants must not use violent rhetoric, make violent threats, or engage in violent activity. Make every necessary effort not to physically intervene with law enforcement officials. Commit to keeping community members safe by avoiding behaviors that could escalate situations. Never provide any information to police that could implicate someone in a crime. Never live stream any recording so as not to broadcast any footage that may incriminate community members and put them at risk of arrest. Not CopWatch while intoxicated or under the influence. Refrain from carrying firearms while CopWatching. And understand that CopWatching involves risk of arrest. And wear masks and practice social distancing during COVID-19.
We do have some tips for filming in groups. We like to film overtly to help act as a deterrent to the cops so they know that someone's watching them, and also to make sure that we're avoiding any legal issues from covert filming. You want to get multiple vantage points and angles. You never really know how a particular incident is going to go down, what direction the cop's going to be facing, like anything like that. So if you have multiple vantage points and angles, you know that you'll have footage that clearly captures the incident in question. You want to begin filming as soon as possible. Incidents of, especially like police violence, can be very quick, and oftentimes in our experience, there's little to no warning. If you are already filming, then you know that you will catch the incident, and you'll also catch the lead up to the incident. Oftentimes, cop watching footage is discredited by cops saying, well, you can't see what happened before the incident. And if you've already been filming, then yes, you can see what happened before the incident. You want to start out filming close, obviously not, within any COVID-19 social distancing limits, but if you start filming closer, then if you're asked to step back, you'll still be able to capture the scene and the audio. You want to limit ongoing commentary and conversation. Sometimes people will, state like, what is the date? What is, sort of pertinent information to contextualize what they're filming, but audio can be really important, and it's better to be able to hear what the cops are saying and what the people interacting with the cops are saying than your own commentary. If a cop approaches a cop watcher and there is any cop watcher interaction, you want to make sure to film that, because we're here to have each other's backs and make sure that our fellow cop watchers are as safe as possible. You want to film horizontally instead of vertically, because filming horizontally helps you capture more of the scene, especially as people are moving around. And we always want to make sure to debrief or process after filming. Filming the cops can be a really intense experience, especially if there is some kind of violent interaction. So it's important to make space for people to process that. And it's also important to debrief so we know who has what footage and so forth. Check. If there is a interaction with the cops, you really want to limit those interactions as much as possible. This is for personal safety. There's an amusing YouTube video linked here, but you can get the idea from the title, SDSU Friday, just shut up, don't talk to the cops. You don't want to provide them information, and you don't want to escalate the situation. We will often intentionally approach cops and ask for their name and badge number. This helps us signal to the cops that there is some oversight, that we are keeping track of them beyond just, filming them on one-offs. It helps us identify cops in footage. So if someone sends us footage and they have no idea who the cop was, we can often say, oh, we know this cop, we know their badge number, we have that on record. sometimes cops will refuse to provide this information, and there's not much that you can do about that. Depending on where you are, your department may or may not have policies that, supposedly require them to, but they'll do what they want. It is helpful to memorize some useful phrases to use in order to limit ongoing conversation with cops. Cop watching can be high stress, and it's hard to sometimes remember how to speak. So none of these guarantee your safety, especially in situations that we're seeing right now around the protests following George Floyd. Police will do what they will do, but some helpful phrases are: I am exercising my right to record police activity. I'm not physically interfering. I just want to make sure no one's rights are violated, and I'm filming from a reasonable distance. If you are asked to step back or to move from where you're filming, you can make that decision of whether or not you're going to comply. We generally recommend complying, unless that's certainly the safest route for yourself. So take a step back, film yourself doing this so there's evidence of doing that. Try your best to maintain the angle image integrity. They'll try to get you to move somewhere where it's harder for you to film, so do your best to maintain your ability to film. And do remind the cops that you have a right to film them as much as they might wish you didn't. Check.
So as we mentioned in the code of conduct, establishing and maintaining trust with community is so important to what we do. We live here, we're part of the community. Maintaining trust makes the work of actually filming more sustainable. And also there's like a political reason for doing so. By building relationships, we can empower each other to build a stronger community that doesn't need police. So if you are interacting with, if you're filming a interaction and a community member who's being questioned by the police or whatever the situation is, asks you to stop filming, what you can do is try to maybe just clarify like what you're doing there and what you're trying to accomplish by telling them, I'm not filming you, I'm filming the police. Just kind of let them know, we're CopWatch. I mean, I think that a lot of people are kind of becoming familiar with what we're doing, and just kind of try to put their mind at ease. If that does not work, try to tell them that we're here just to not make sure the cops don't violate your rights. And if that is also ineffective, know when to walk away. Just stop filming, especially if you think it's not going to be a violent interaction. Some people just don't like being on camera, and then we respect that, and are somewhat off. It comes up somewhat often that we just turn the phone camera off and kind of find something, or maybe just stand there until we know that the situation is over. After situations, after interactions with community members and police, we like to offer Know Your Rights cards, just so people are aware what their rights are in the moment when they're talking to police. Not everybody really is clear on everything, so it's helpful to have that information, and also to just have a conversation with people and like clarify what happened. A lot of times we show up to the interaction after it starts, so we don't really know what led to the police like being called or coming over or whatever precipitated the event. And tell people about cop watching. It's a good introduction to what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's a way to let it be known that it's a thing and it's accessible, and if anybody is interested, we're definitely down to form relationships and just get information, because people who are out in town a lot have a lot of insight into what the police are doing, and it helps us be more effective in what we're doing. So definitely just let them know who we are, and hope to build relationships from there. Check.
As far as distribution of film goes, a lot of this is in our code of conduct, but just to highlight, we will provide film to victims or defense attorneys if it's helpful or it's requested. As far as social media or journalists go, we would only provide film with the consent of everyone filmed. And even then, only after careful consideration of side effects. And we err on the side of not sharing. This is to maintain, good community relations. It's to make sure that, we don't accidentally share video that could be used against someone, which goes along with no live streaming, which is also, I believe, in the code of conduct. We don't want to risk any video getting out that could help the cops. For BTV CopWatch, any arrest footage, we always upload to our Keybase, which is our secure organizing chat. This makes sure that in the future, because sometimes we don't know who was being filmed, or it's not clear if it will be useful, and the justice system could be slow. So sometimes we'll get people asking for footage well after the fact, and so it's good to store all of that, to not delete anything, because you never know what might be useful. And it's also a good practice, a good way we can receive footage from people who aren't even in CopWatch, who will get in touch with us and ask us either if we filmed something or ask to provide us with footage, and we can keep track of that. Check.
So usually, especially in live trainings, we like to talk a little bit about our experiences cop watching and offer if people have questions and things like that. But just to go over a little bit of an overview or tidbits. And this has changed over time as well. So when BTV CopWatch was first formed, the chief of police was Del Pozo, and his big thing was being really PR focused and wanting to send the message to the public that he was very pro CopWatch, and the cops are happy to be filmed and things like that, which has led the cops to be advised to be very friendly with us. But it's very clear, though, in many situations that they are not happy with us filming. And as Del Pozo is no longer on the force, and there's an interim chief, and we're not sure about what the future will look like, as well as, again, how the political climate is shaping up. We never want to get too comfortable that the cops won't start getting more and more aggressive towards us. So far it's been pretty petty interactions. We've had experiences of cops running away from us on Church Street, and cops on multiple occasions turning on their lights to get us to chase them, and then kind of laughing about how they got us. And it's really ridiculous, but at the same time, we're quite happy that we're keeping them entertained, because their usual form of entertainment is harassing homeless folks. So if they want to mess with us instead, that's perfectly fine. The last few bullet points here are just situations that I think we've already gone over in the training, but just ones that you want to remember, because in the moment it can be kind of you can get flustered and not remember what to do. So maybe just going out, before you go out, just remember, if a cop asks you to step back, you may choose to and film yourself taking maybe a baby step back. If someone asks not to be filmed, you can remind them that, or you can let them know why we're filming, so they don't just think, we're posting on social media. They know that we're filming there for their benefit, but stop if they, really don't want us there, out of privacy. Again, remembering that if a cop approaches a cop watcher, to always have a camera on that interaction as well when possible. And again, just some practicing some one-liners of when a bystander's ask what you're doing, or, we get a wide range of responses to us cop watching. We get a lot of people, both the people being filmed and just random people walking by saying thank you. But occasionally we get people who are, not happy with what we're doing. And so to just practice those kind of those one-liners, if you don't think it'll be a productive conversation, to kind of not take the bait there. And so just some information about how to get involved. So if you are interested, especially in joining our group shifts and just going out one time, and I do recommend, even if it's not something you think you'll do on a regular basis, sometimes going out on a group shift just one time is really beneficial, because sometimes the first time you pull out your camera in front of a police officer is the scariest. And so to be in a group setting for that can help you feel empowered for the next time. If you just spontaneously come across a police interaction and you're alone, you might feel more confident doing it. So anyway, you can sign up for our mailing list. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. We post pretty regular updates, news, things like that. And you can always message us there too if you're wanting to get involved. We're pretty responsive on Facebook and Twitter. You can keep in mind as well that a lot of people like the idea of holding the police accountable and things like that, but aren't necessarily comfortable filming for various reasons. There's actually a lot of ways, especially as BTV CopWatch expands our projects, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. So if we are in the middle of a mutual aid project, you can get involved with that. We have some data collection and public record request tasks to do time to time. And then just general, it really shifts throughout time, but whatever organizing, possibly political organizing we're involved with, outreach, partnering with other organizations and groups. And so if there's a lot of behind the scenes work to do. So don't think that just because you don't want to go out to film or go out on group shifts that you can't be involved, because you definitely can. And if you happen to not be in Burlington, but you want to, continue this work or want any help with collaboration, please feel free to be in touch. We have a lot of materials, not only the Know Your Rights flyers, but some zines. And if you want any assistance, like facilitating a training in your area, don't hesitate to be in touch.
And on that note, some further work that folks can do is seek out more trainings and information that helps build this type of community work. We've talked a lot about being community builders and building trusting relationships with the folks that we interact with. So learning more about de-escalation training techniques is really handy. First aid and medic training, self-defense is always really good to know in terms of getting yourself confident in managing situations without wanting to rely on calling in the violence of police to defend yourself. Also get to know rights, other types of rights like migrant rights, squatters' rights, drug use and overdose protections. And also get to know the emergency services and shelters in your area if we're supporting folks who need to survive by accessing those nonprofits. It's good to know, and it's who they are and how to contact them and facilitate that if folks need that, with the huge caveat that nonprofits also rely on police to police the behavior of the people who they serve, and can be further marginalizing for the folks that they serve and harmful. So I think we've been able to have some really good conversations, very frank conversations with the folks we interact with out in community building about how to access services, and also how to know when to not give up information about yourself to those services, and respecting people's decisions to access or not to access as they're comfortable with. So specifically with that, we help facilitate people get into shelter during COVID shutdown, because there is more sheltering effort being done at the beginning of COVID shelter in place. Those options have started to diminish for our folks that we work with. And then also knowing how to help folks access things like unemployment, or knowing how to access their emergency, like the emergency room, offering folks rides to the emergency room or to call the ambulance if they need that. So yeah, get out there, learn more about your community, keep educating yourself, and building community is what we're all about. And on that note, I'll be the first to thank you for joining us and taking a minute to learn about cop watching and the work that we do. I'll turn it over to the rest of the folks on here.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, or quote unquote coming. Yeah, we really do hope you'll get in touch. This is a non-hierarchical organization, so if you have ideas of things that you think we could be doing as well, or just want to get involved in any way, or just want to just chat and say hi and get to know your neiber, do be in touch.